Marvel at the Ouija board that will make your damage deposit disappear.
Discover why one should never accept an amulet from a stranger at a German bar.
Die of embarrassment when you learn that the chain-smoking ghost is your dad.
All this plus more haunted and harrowing hypnagogia.
It's spine-tingling.
It's blood-curdling.
It's this week's ghastly gargle of odd tonic.
Welcome to the Parlour. I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Maxwell. We've saved a spot by the fireplace, so please join us as we present our second edition of Odd Tonic Parlour Stories, where we once again reach deep into the mailbag and draw from its shadows more eerie, bizarre, and undeniably spooky true stories submitted by lovely guests like yourself. Dear Jennifer, can I express to you how excited I am to be doing this again? Episode 2, where we first narrated submitted stories, is really one of my favorite episodes thus far.
Spaghetti sauce. Well, you know me, I just love a story that shakes up everyday routines.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are the stories that are like a lightning bolt of strange in a field of normalcy.
Yes, I definitely eat these up like popcorn.
What story stands out to you the most a month later from episode 2?
Oh, geez. I think that just eerie visuals of the bus story with the man walking above the clouds with the hat and the long dark robes.
Yeah,
just
that was a great
that
visual
alone just kind of pops in my head a lot.
Yeah, me too. I think the one that stands out the most for me is the last one, the story that Jay submitted. Although it might be standing out in my head the most because that was the story that reportedly our friend's 12-year-old daughter could not sleep because of... Were there tears involved?
No, there weren't tears, but so far we had, a diehard fan, and that episode came along, and suddenly it was like, nope, I'm out. I can't sleep at night, reverting to needing a nightlight and parental guidance. So
mission accomplished. It does my heart so much good to know that we are leaving our mark.
We're affecting
on the next
youth.
generation. Well, if you haven't listened to the second episode, dear guest, go back and do so. Holy cats, there are some creepy stories waiting for you.
And speaking of creepy stories, we want to hear yours. So please do send it in. Instructions to follow later in the show. We'd also like to congratulate last week's winners of our giveaway.
Yeah.
Ada, Richard, Kate, and Katie were all blind drawing winners of our mysterious odd tonic keepsakes.
Keepsakes? Or obviously cursed objects?
We wouldn't do that to people.
Yet.
Yeah, we might. Congratulations to you, and a big warm thank you to everyone who entered our giveaway. We sincerely appreciate your lovely reviews and your kind support of Odd Tonic. Thank you so much. Group hug.
Group hug. All right. Does that conclude the old business, my love?
Let's review the notes. Giveaway, thank yous. We're tabling the strange tentacle markings in our bathroom tiles. So yes, that's it for old business.
Excellent. Then let us proceed with the new. Nope, it's too late to back out now, dear guest, as we bring you our first story, submitted by Kate. When I was a teenager, my parents got divorced. My dad moved to a little apartment complex a town over. It had 2 floors of maybe 8 apartments and a basement. The basement had locked storage rooms and a coin-operated washer and dryer. When I stayed with my dad, my friends and I would go down to the basement and mess around and be general teenage idiots.
Relatable.
Which leads to the Ouija board. The Ouija board came to me via a neighbor girl who lived near my mom just a few blocks down. When I was at her house one day, She took me up to her parents' bedroom and removed a box from way back in the closet. She told me that it was very old, and it sure looked that way. The board was carved into a slab of tree, not quite round, not quite square, with barked edges, and all the lettering was painted black. The box that held the board was
It wasn't covered and bound in human flesh, was it? I mean, this story is creepy already. Who owns a Ouija board that isn't mass printed by a large conglomerate toy company?
That's right. Down with mom and pop stores. Pave the world!
I'm sorry. Continue.
The board was hand-carved wood as well, with a very loose flower motif all over. No paint. It had an old, worn-looking brass latch on the front, the kind that a lock could loop through, if there had been a lock. This friend and I played with the Ouija board a couple of times over the span of a few months. I don't remember anything significant occurring, but somehow the board ended up staying with me. Eventually, I took the board to my dad's apartment, which leads to this story's main event. We were in the basement, playing with the board, 3 other friends and myself. My memory is fuzzy as to what the details of the board session were. We played for a long time with much skepticism and lots of giggling. I do not know if we ever said goodbye to the board. I don't think we did, and it bothers me to this day. Something in my gut told me not to bring the Ouija board upstairs to the apartment after the session that night. So, on instinct alone, I decided to leave the board inside my dad's storage room in the basement.
Good girl. Always trust your gut.
There was only one key to his storage room, and I had it. I unlocked the storage room door, put the spirit board in its box, placed the box inside my dad's old mini fridge, and locked the room. I popped the key in my jeans pocket, where it stayed until the next day, and went upstairs. That morning, we woke up to a lot of hubbub in the apartment complex. People shouting, running, and heavy things being moved. I went outside into the hall and looked down the common stairwell to see the landlord and several tenants rushing to and from the basement. So I began to descend the 2 flights down to the basement. First, I saw the water. There was so much water. High enough that it came up over the last step of the basement staircase. I took a few more steps down, pausing at the last step before the flood, and that's when I saw it. Straight ahead of me was the washing machine. The washing machine had been pulled, rather, ripped from its wall and all of its connections, and now it was sitting in the center of the basement floor, its front facing the stairs. I watched the torrent of water gushing out of the wall where the washer normally sat. I slowly turned my attention back to the washing machine, having only glanced at it before. Sitting on top of the washing machine was the Ouija board, out of the locked room, out of the mini fridge, and out of its box with the planchette sitting neatly on top. In my shock, my instant reaction was to look at my dad's storage room door. It was still shut and locked. It was still shut and locked. Not only had a heavy commercial washer been somehow ripped from the wall and muscled into the middle of the basement, but the board had gotten out of a locked and still locked room. I booked it upstairs and do not remember exactly what happened after that, but I did not touch or see the board again. I think my dad may have put it back in the box in the storage unit after everything was drained and fixed. I honestly do not know. My father and I are estranged and have been for years now. For all I know, the board is still down there.
Amazingly creepy.
Yes, love it.
But I do think there's a missed opportunity there. That spirit board clearly just wanted to be loved. Or at least sold on eBay, as you do.
Somebody love me. Well, here is another haunting story from Kate, who apparently has quite the supernatural lifestyle.
When I was around 1 year old, my parents moved from Wisconsin to California and then moved back again when I was around 11. We lived with my grandparents to get settled back into our Wisconsin lives, and then eventually moved to the upstairs of a farmhouse duplex in West Bend. This house was on a decent amount of property, surrounded by woods, 2 large fields, a junkyard, and several old utility buildings, sheds, and garages. The house sits on a hill separated from, but still a part of, a small neighborhood. From the moment we moved into that house, there was strangeness abound. I have endless stories about this haunted home and property. This one is but the first. On the back side of the house was a massive tree. In it, our downstairs neighbor, and owner of the property, had built a tree house for me and his son, who was around my age. The tree house was on the edge of a patch of woods on the property, but stood apart from the woods themselves. There was also a thick rope swing hanging from a large branch off the side where the treehouse was perched. When you played at the treehouse, you could see one of the old buildings. It was the oldest-looking one on the property, a small 2-room house, hand-built from stone and mortar, with dirt floors. One afternoon, I was playing by myself at the treehouse when I decided it would be a great idea to explore the old stone home, to scour its contents and storage for more fun objects to add to the treehouse. So off I went to the big, thick, worn wooden front door of the old stone building. Upon pushing the door open and stepping inside, a thick feeling in the air made me stop in my tracks. The sun was shining outside. It was summer, but inside that building the air was heavy and freezing cold, far colder than normal for the weather. Ignoring the dark, cold feeling, I began to look around. Across from me were stacks of old windows and random storage leaning against all the walls, nothing out of the ordinary for buildings on the property. Beneath my feet, the floor was earth, pure dirt, soft and fine from foot traffic. I don't know what came over me next, probably just kid stuff, but I felt the urge to dig in the dirt floor. I had no idea how long I dug for, but it was like I was in a time warp. It felt like forever in that moment. Everything was slow like molasses. Digging in the dirt, I hit something small, about the size of the tip of my pinky, and I began the process of removing it. In unearthing the one small object, I began to notice many others just like it all around in the dirt. I began to clean one off as best I could, and then I stopped cold. It was a tooth. They were all teeth. Dozens of fairly large, clearly non-human teeth. And upon digging a bit more, I discovered other bones scattered throughout. The feeling inside that little stone house got even heavier. There was one small room, presumably what used to be a bedroom, at the back of the building. It had a door just like the one in the front, with very heavy wood on rusty hinges. The door was stuck in the dirt floor, sitting half open. The room behind it was dark. Something caught my eye. The door started to move, scraping against the floor, trying to dislodge itself, back and forth, shoving the dirt from side to side, building little mounds of earth on either side as it rocked on its rusty hinges. An overwhelming sense of thick, unwelcoming energy overtook the room, and I ran out, a fist of teeth and dirt still clenched tightly in one hand. I went to the downstairs neighbor immediately, told him what happened, and showed him the teeth. Bob was such a kind, gentle, quiet, and caring man. He and his son were such a blessing to me at that time, such wonderful people. Bob, with his very worn ball cap on, furrowed his tan, weathered brow and shifted his thick, dark, bushy mustache ever so slightly. It was clear he knew something. Bob got up from his seat and went to the cabinet where he pulled out a few old papers and a very small section of ratty-looking rope. He sat back down in his seat across from where I was sitting at his dining room table and slowly slid the papers across to me. The papers had old town hall stamps or markings. It also included the address of the house we were sitting in currently, but the date on the papers read 1901. Before I could read further, Bob began to speak. There was a family that lived on the property many, many years ago, a cattle farmer and his wife. However, they were not the first to inhabit the land. It had been taken by force from the native peoples. The wife gave birth to a daughter who grew to the age of 6 when she had a freak accident. The farmer had put up a rope swing in the big old tree in the yard right by the stone house on the edge of the woods for his daughter. One afternoon, the child was playing alone when somehow she had gotten herself caught up and strangled in the rope swing. The mother was the first to find her. She went into a terrible deep depression, which would inevitably kill her. Either by her own hand or by illness, it's not known for sure. Very shortly after his wife's passing, the farmer had a psychotic break wherein he proceeded to slaughter every single one of his cattle, bury them in the dirt floor of the home, and then killed himself.
Would you like a cookie? That's an intense story for a kid.
I know. The room was quiet for what felt like forever, but really it was only moments. I looked down at the table, at the papers in front of me, records of the events, and the small piece of tattered old rope. When I looked up at Bob again, he said, "I found that tied to the tree when I bought the place a long time ago. I've had some encounters here myself, so I looked into it at the town hall. They gave me all that they had and said I could keep it. They had it all on the computers now, and it was a long-forgotten event." The farmer was still there. It would not be the last time we encountered one another over the years that my family lived there. The farmer was not happy. The farmer was bound and twisted by darkness, and now he knew I was aware of him, for better or worse. Soon after, I would discover 2 things. 1, that I was, and still am, a sensitive. 2, the rancher was definitely not the only spirit there. More stories from the farmhouse days to come.
Wow. I hope so. Wow. Thank you so much for your stories, Kate. We definitely want to hear more.
I'm hoping for more stories of the haunted mini fridge. And that mini fridge goes on to become mayor of West Bend. Now we move on to a story sent to us from Marcus.
I'm Marcus. I was born in 1979 and raised in West Germany. This is my story. After I did my time in the German military, I went back to civilian life and my job as a car mechanic in March 2000. In the early summer of the same year, my boss had to lay me off as the German automobile industry crisis struck my company. Far too early to be looking for a new job for my taste, but it was what it was. So, I got employed at a small company who maintained a service for the ADAC, German Automobile Club, which meant I had to get out on the road most of the day and provide help for members of the ADAC whose cars had quit on them or who got into an accident. By late October that same year, I had already seen some servicemen from other contractors have minor accidents and brushes with speeding cars while on the job. So, I decided to quit and get another job away from the traffic. On the 9th of January, 2001, 3 days before I could leave the company, I got hit by a car while clearing the scene of a previous accident. The police had opened the road too soon. I had just loaded the wreck on my truck and was clearing the road from oil and liquids when I got hit at nearly 50 miles per hour, which is quite devastating to the human body. Devastating indeed, dear guest. Marcus's body hit the ground 30 meters away from where the car had slammed into him, and he flatlined. To spare the faint of heart, we are going to skip the gruesome detail of the violence done to our poor friend. Instead, we'll use Marcus's own words in summing up the description of his ravaged face and body. Quote, Pablo Picasso would have signed me as one of his later masterpieces. The EMTs arrived and, after 2 minutes of cardiac massage, I opened my eyes and tried to get up, not aware of my condition due to massive trauma. Luckily, the ambulance arrived very shortly after, and I got the ride of my life, so to speak. The hospital I got delivered to had some specialists for trauma and facial injuries and deformities, who immediately started the first of my 2 successful surgical procedures. Afterwards, They inserted various tubes for draining, feeding, and breathing, and I was set. At that time, my condition was very stable, which, given my state, left the doctors a bit puzzled. The next day was my second big surgery, in which I got 28 microplates of titanium fixed with 168 screws to give my facial skull a functional shape again. Luckily, my spinal cord was not injured in the slightest, outside the 3 broken vertebrae. After the surgery, my respiratory tract began to swell, so badly that the breathing tube was getting crimped. I began to panic, so they sedated me again to fix the problem, which put me in a coma for 3.5 weeks.
Wow.
And here, says Marcus, is where things began to get unpleasant.
Up until now, his spa vacation plans have been going so well.
While in the coma, he goes on, or shortly after, when I was still not conscious most of the time, I had visions of dying in various ways, in various places, or as various other people. For example, I experienced dying as a British missionary in a third world country from snake venom, getting run over by a truck as a biker, hanged by loyalists of Francisco Franco in Spain, taking a headshot in the trenches of Flanders, and many more scenarios. Every now and then, I gained the ability to control what was happening, being able to change the scene by just turning around, only to stand in front of a huge painting of the gates of hell, or sometimes heaven. When I finally came out of the coma and was awake for longer periods, I realized that I was not able to see properly and unable to speak at all. My eyes were still recovering, and the massive amount of chemicals and medication left me little to no control of my muscles and reflexes. Meanwhile, speaking with 3 tubes in the throat is just not possible. And, to make things worse, I was strapped to the bed. So, I was all by my lonely self, with only my thoughts and other senses that were, more or less, functioning. When I did have visitors, it was mostly gestures or groans on my part. During the nighttime, however, I was accompanied by a night shift nurse. She told me stories, took care of my needs, and gave me a bit of comfort. Her presence made me calm and gave me hope for the future. Doctors can often be jerks and forget that people have feelings. It did not help me very much to be told by one of them that I really shouldn't have lived through the impact of the car, much less through my injuries. But the nurse gave me hope and feeling that everything would go back to normal again.
It's nice that someone didn't treat him like a lump of bandages in a bed.
Yeah. I finally got to leave the hospital for a week at the end of February before going to another clinic to get my leg fixed. Before I left, I stopped at the nurse's station to say that I wanted to thank my night shift nurse for all that she had done for me. They told me that I had been monitored only by a male caregiver who checked in maybe twice each night. I was puzzled and described her as well as I could. They finally understood who I was talking about and let me know that this nurse had last been on duty in 1998 before she passed away to cancer.
What? Oh my gosh.
This news was quite the sucker punch, I can assure you.
It's a sucker punch for me.
Shaken by that, I asked my parents to take me in for the week. It gave me some comfort to be back in my childhood bedroom. I eventually forgot about the nurse, and by summer, my leg was working properly. My spine was free of pain, and my face had stopped looking as if I was the sole survivor of a bar fight. I finally got back to my apartment and did my outpatient PT every day. Then, one night, I woke up knowing that I was not alone in the room. I could feel the presence, and with the dim light from the outside window, I could see a silhouette standing next to my bed. In terror, I kicked in their direction and slammed my hand on the light switch. No one was there. With my heart beating in my throat, I grabbed the short wooden stick that I used for squats during PT and searched my whole flat for the intruder, my cell phone in hand. Stranger still, when I tried to call 110, German 911, I couldn't manage to convince my hand to dial the numbers. My fingers seemed stuck. When this weird spell finally lifted and I could move my hand again, my phone battery, which was at 75% charge, instantly went dead. I had to charge it up again from 0. This occurred several more times during the course of the year, and I was beginning to think I had finally lost it. I went to a psychotherapist and searched for help, but the things I described left him thinking I was having nightmares, and so he prescribed meds for better sleep. Later, while attending an RPG game night at a local bar, a person I barely knew, let's call him Rupert, approached me and said, "I think you'd understand if I told you that it's obvious to me that you have seen the abyss and are having uninvited guests every now and then. Here, take this amulet and let me know if you keep having restless nights." He left me almost speechless, but I was willing to try almost anything at that point. The amulet seemed to help at first, but every now and then I had the impression of someone watching me, following me, or waiting for me. I heard noises in the attic and found wet footprints in the basement.
Was there a Ouija board?
Maybe we are learning through these stories that ghosts just need to do their laundry.
I was just thinking, everything's connected.
Rupert had recently moved away at that point, and so I accepted the situation as it was. At least no one was standing in my room at night anymore. In 2003, my partner, who I later married in 2013, moved in with me. At first, everything was fine. But then he told me that he got a funny feeling near the drawer that I kept the amulet in. So I decided to trust him and told him everything that had happened, bit by bit, hoping that I would not sound like a total crackpot. As it is with gamers, you often meet people who are enthusiastic about the occult, the odd, or the supernatural. Isn't that right, my love?
Slowly puts down a cult book.
And he happened to have some contacts who were interested in such affairs. So we met with them, and I finally disclosed all my adventures. A very gentle person, let's call him Tom, who also happened to know Rupert, asked me to throw that amulet away and burn a bit of wood in every room of my home. He told me that Rupert was not known to be the nicest person, which rang true to me, having heard what other people later said about him. So I decided to trust Tom, burn the wood he recommended, and got rid of that amulet. After that, he visited my home, sat down in every room, took in the atmosphere, and finally presented me with an amethyst in a silver frame. He patted me on the shoulder and left with a smile that gave me great comfort. Since that day, I merely get a funny feeling now and then. And since we got 2 cats in 2012, my funny feelings are now accompanied by their getting a little jumpy and hissing. But all in all, I now have my peaceful life back, and I won't complain about that. Holy cats, Marcus.
Wow.
Wow. I don't know. We have ghostly nurses and shadow people and magic amulet.
Right.
I don't know if you got catapulted into the dead zone or a fantasy novel.
Wow. After everything he's been through, it's really nice to hear life is leveled out and he's found some happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing story. Thanks for submitting that. And hey, maybe a quick PSA. Hey, folks, if you're driving down the highway and you see people working on the highway, slow down. Remember, they have lives just like our dear friend Marcus.
They sure do.
All right, when we return, we'll share tales of shadow people babysitters, pervy ghosts, and the awkwardness of when a family's terrifying ghost is you.
You're listening to Odd Tonic. Don't get lost in the spider-webbed catacombs. We'll be right back.
Thank you for listening to Odd Tonic. We love having you in the parlor.
If you're enjoying your eerie visit with us tonight, please subscribe and write us a kind review on iTunes. It will really help us out.
As always, you can visit us on Twitter and Instagram and like us on Facebook, all at Odd Tonic Society.
And are you enjoying tonight's spooky stories? Why not send yours? It's cheaper than therapy. Send it to the Parlour at oddtonicsociety.com.
We can't wait to read about your flirtation with the phantasmagoric.
Now let's return to more Parlour stories.
Welcome back. Now, dear guest, let's bid our friend Marcus auf Wiedersehen as we head back to the U.S. and the upper Midwest for a story sent to us from Miranda.
I was raised as a military kid, and when I was a teenager in 2005, my family lived on a military base in North Dakota. Living there felt secure, but the neighborhood always felt a bit off. Save ours, most of the houses were empty, as they were going to tear down that section of housing in a year. It's a little difficult to explain without sounding like some mystic, but there was this constant dark feeling to it. Even our house felt uneasy and dark. I had trouble sleeping when living there, for reasons I could never really explain, at first. Both my younger siblings and I were lucky enough to have our own bedrooms. Mine was on the back corner of the house at the end of the hallway. One night, as the house was silent with everyone sleeping, I was lying in bed, still awake. I felt too anxious to sleep, but wasn't sure why. As I faced the wall next to my bed, I remember suddenly feeling like I had to turn around that instant. I turned over, and I saw it. A man, made entirely of shadow and 3 feet from my bed, was gliding towards me on motionless legs. Intense anger radiated from him, and he held a knife, positioned to stab. The whole room was completely still as the eyes in his round face stared directly into mine. I was paralyzed with fear, yet somehow I knew innately that his knife was not for me. Suddenly, he disappeared, but it was odd, like when you get flashed by a bright light and it lingers behind your eyelids, except this was a shadow. And as I stared at the spot he had been, his image slowly faded like a snapshot in my mind.
Fascinating.
Yeah. The entire encounter had only lasted 1 or 2 seconds. There had been so much red in the emotion I felt from him. It terrified me so much. I didn't fall asleep for hours. I couldn't move from my spot. I don't remember if my bedroom door was open, but I know my curtain, hung for privacy between the door and my bed, was completely closed and hadn't been moved when the man appeared.
Interesting.
She needs a completely new curtain made perhaps entirely out of sage or some sort of holy cloth. And this is me speaking truthfully, though. At least for me, there's always been something about military housing. And I say that coming from a military background from my childhood. Maybe it's just because it's such a transitory space, so hard emotions can just linger there. Or maybe there's this correlation between war experiences or PTSD that these spaces just seem to absorb that kind of energy.
Yeah. Well, I could certainly see where that emotion would be lingering. I mean, these families are often waiting for, you know, a spouse, a parent to come back after long periods.
Exactly. So, and then they do return and they're dealing with whatever they had to deal with before.
Yeah.
And I can see spaces absorbing that kind of energy. And I can see where the knife wasn't meant for her, you know?
Right. Yeah, interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah. Coming back to Miranda's story. That was the first time I saw a shadow person, but it wasn't my last.
Uh-oh.
The second time was maybe 7 months later when I was in England for a family vacation. We were around 2/3 into our 17-day trip and heading to a museum or a restaurant. I can't remember what town we were visiting at that point, but my family and I were on a gray double-decker bus. I was on the top level in a window seat on the left side. I remember I was feeling relaxed, maybe a bit tired from all the traveling. The bus was making a right turn on a fairly busy downtown intersection when I glanced down at the empty sidewalk and saw my second shadow person suddenly flash into appearance. She was a young adult running across the sidewalk like she was out for a jog. She had a ponytail. That detail stuck out to me. Unlike the first guy, her legs moved as she ran. She did not appear to be running in fear, but I felt her urgency. I remember thinking that something was wrong. She was in danger, but she wasn't scared. It was like she didn't know. I wanted to go after her and tell her, warn her something was wrong, but it seemed weird because she wasn't scared, and she wasn't there. I saw her, but she didn't see me. Like the first one, she was gone in a flash, leaving an imprint on my eyes for a few seconds. Once again, I felt frozen in place, but no one else had seen her. There were no other shadows on the crosswalk, and it was in the middle of a sunny day, so I knew it hadn't been some nighttime trick. I was not on any medication, and I've never been drunk or on drugs. Good disclaimer. I don't know if the two shadow people were related. I hadn't thought about the first one much before I saw the second. Neither of them looked like people I knew then, nor anyone I've met since. I've seen other figures since then, but none that were shadow people, not like them. I'm Catholic, and while I believe there is a world of spirits, I never mess with them. I don't even do tarot cards or watch horror movies, so I can't explain why I saw them.
Wow. Miranda, great story. Thank you.
Yes, but I've said it before, and I will say it again.
What's that?
Never take the bus.
Oh, no. Going back to episode 2.
And now we will travel, not by bus, to Maine for a story sent in by Kelsey.
I have so many stories. For the past 8 or so years, I've lived in a 100-plus-year-old farmhouse in a small town in Maine. When we moved in, the previous residents' belongings were still in the house. We had to clean all of their stuff out before we could move in. Strike one in moving into a new house. A few months after settling in, an elderly neighbor told us that the people who had lived here before had just up and left in the middle of the night and never came back. Strike two, Jennifer. That fall, my oldest daughter started 2nd grade at our new house. When she got on the bus, a friend informed her that our house was the haunted house. Strike 3. Time to find a new house.
Accurate.
Since then, many people that we have come across have told stories about experiences that had supposedly taken place in our house. One man said that his ex-wife had lived there and experienced a man's floating head in her, now my, bedroom.
What?
When my middle daughter was about 2 years old in 2011, I would wake up around 2 a.m. and hear her laughing, talking, and playing with someone in her room. When I asked her who she was playing with, she answered, "The captain." I would go in and lay with her on the bed until she fell back asleep, and I could hear footsteps circling her bed and the sound of fabric moving, swishing. Recently, a new friend stopped by my house and was sitting outside in his truck with his dog as we talked. His dog kept barking and growling, trying to jump out the window, focused on my upstairs window. After we watched the dog for a few minutes, my friend said, "He's barking at the captain." I asked him to elaborate. He told me that his good friend used to live in the house, and he had spent a lot of time there with him. Did the entire town live in this person's house?
I think so. It was everyone's furniture.
They had had a lot of unexplained activity upstairs, and nicknamed the spirit in the house the Captain. I had never told him about any of our experiences. Another time, I was lying on the couch reading a book while I was home alone. I sort of halfway fell asleep. That's always when it happens, right? My eyes were closed and I was relaxed, but I was still aware of what was going on. I was wearing a pretty tight, stretchy tank top, and suddenly it felt as if someone had pinched the fabric on my chest and pulled my shirt out a few inches. My eyes snapped open, and I saw that the shirt was pointed like someone was doing exactly what I had described, about 4 inches off my chest. I gasped, and the fabric snapped back down.
Wow, pervy ghost.
I know. The captain likes the ladies.
I prefer the Victorian gentleman ghosts that float around reading poetry. Thank you. I'll put my order in now.
There have been lots of times when doors opened or closed seemingly on their own. Footsteps or bangs have occurred without explanation. Tapping, knocking, or scratching on my bedroom wall at night. We've heard a woman's cheery voice saying hello or a family member's name, and faucets turn on full force when no one is anywhere near them. People that are new visitors to the house have been scratched. There was one instance where a deflating helium balloon followed my ex. It had been on the floor and unable to float for at least a week prior. The night it happened, we were upstairs in the hallway when the balloon came gliding out of one of the bedrooms, floating about 3 feet off the floor. It followed my ex down the hallway while I watched. He took a sharp turn into another bedroom, and the balloon followed. He walked around the bed in the center of the room, and so did the balloon. It seemed to mimic his movements exactly, though taking a bit longer than he did. He went forward. It would go forward. He backed up. It would back up. This continued for about 30 minutes until we decided to go back downstairs. When we went back up later that night, the balloon was again deflated on the floor and never moved again. There are so many more things that have happened, but this story is already very long. And that's where it ends. Kelsey, you left us hanging.
Come back.
I want to hear about all the toys coming alive. That was excellent. Thank you so much for submitting your story. Now we will move on to Pamela as she tells the story of her newly bought home. Oh, no.
I'm sure it's all good. It's all good. My husband and I moved into a new home about 2 years ago. I was pregnant at the time and we needed more space. It was a cute duplex with a charming little yard, quiet neighborhood, and a sweet room that would be our child's nursery. We never met the previous owner. All transactions were done through our real estate people, which is pretty common.
Previous owner? Satan.
Shh. The house was already vacant and didn't have any furniture left behind. I can't say that the place had any bad vibes. There was a somewhat odd incident in which, during closing, it was discovered while minor work was being done on the property that a bunch of storage bins were left behind in the crawl space. Now, small crawl space doors in the sides of walls always seem a little creepy anyway, and I was not going to go in there and investigate what was left behind. I'll assume it was Christmas decorations.
Aw.
All those ugly sweaters Grandma's knits and no one wants.
Oh, but those are so trendy now.
She could have been rich.
She could have been.
But let's not make her feel bad. Pamela, You're lucky you didn't open the bin of dried llama brains. Gross. No matter what the bins were filled with, they were removed. Looking back, the evening before we moved into the house, we were visiting the property, keys in hand, touring the house and discussing the moving strategy and where we would put furniture. Full disclosure, the house was warm from being closed up. I was super pregnant and exhausted from packing, and discussing the move ahead was easily overwhelming. But that moment, standing in my soon-to-be daughter's bedroom, something within me just broke. I freaked out and just had a bad feeling. I couldn't believe I was saying it, but I said to my husband, "We cannot move here."
Oh, no.
Of course, after a moment, I calmed down. My husband is amazing. And of course, the move-in went fine.
Shakespearean foreshadowing, I suspect.
Well, honestly, I don't think anyone could move without at least one stress meltdown and curling into a burrito ball experience, right?
That's true. We all have that.
It's a requirement. After my daughter was born, one night I was putting my baby to bed. She was drifting off to sleep in my arms, and I was very carefully walking to her crib to gently place her in it. In the dim light of the room, I felt a presence behind me. Assuming it was my husband coming to tell me something, I didn't turn around and continued to put our daughter to bed. As I had just put her in her crib, I heard my husband say my name. It's hard to describe, but it felt like a whisper in my ear. I quickly turned, and he wasn't there. No one was there. I was so chilled by this that I quickly snatched my baby, not caring if I woke her, and ran out of the room to find my husband. I found him downstairs. He had not called my name.
Yikes.
Another time, while grabbing some laundry, I passed by her room as she was down for a nap. I turned my head into her room, as new mothers do, just to get a peek of my little sleeping baby. As I did, I saw a shadowy figure move across the dark room. I wasn't sure what I saw. When I looked around, of course, nothing was there. Obviously, I felt really uneasy, but it's hard not to come up with rational explanations when you are sleep deprived from a new infant. All this time, I thought it was sleep deprivation or my mind playing tricks on me. How many parents have been there?
All of them.
You can't remember words for common items, what month it is, or notice if your shirt is on inside out. You can fall asleep at the drop of a hat, but wake up every 20 minutes because your nervous system is on high alert. The sincere joys of motherhood come with frayed edges in those early days. I just wasn't getting enough sleep, I told myself. Well, after we had been getting some sleep, one morning, while my mom was visiting, my husband asked her if she had gone into our baby's room during the night. My mother said she hadn't been in there. When I asked my husband why he wanted to know if my mother was in the room, he answered, "I woke up in the middle of the night and checked the baby monitor, and I saw a shadow. I thought maybe your mom was there."
Wow. Just the ghostly nanny.
I know that sounds like heavy stuff, but I do honestly think that things are getting better. My daughter is over 1 year old now. I don't feel anything bad in the house, and I truly think that the more good energy we put into the place, the better it is. It's our home now. Looking back, it's hard for me not to say I lost a lot of sleep over a new baby, so who really knows what was going on? Though I do find it odd that her room is the only room in the house we see and experience this stuff. I will let you know if anything else happens, but we are looking forward to just building happy memories in a home with our cute-as-a-button daughter.
I'm glad that one had a happy ending.
I think baby monitors rank right up there with Ouija boards. They let us monitor the spirit world just as much as the babies.
So true.
They should come with a warning, not intended use.
Not intended use.
So Pamela ends with this. Oh, and my husband Chris has a short story to chime in with that is pretty spooky. He says, "When I was a kid, we were living in a real old house in Maryland. There were several times laundry would fall down the chute, but everyone would be accounted for and no one was upstairs.
What?
as if someone was up there that couldn't stand the laundry being dirty and they were helping out. The lights would turn on and off every now and then. Which lights? Only the lights from the top of the laundry chute.
Wow, I'm detecting a theme in this episode.
That sounds incredibly unsettling. Who would want to be doing laundry in the afterlife? My God, you'd think it would be one of the only perks of being dead, not having to do laundry anymore. But I guess occasionally maybe you'd have to wash your ghostly sheets.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems that ghosts really enjoy doing laundry.
We do have a theme this evening. No laundry in this one. Here's an amazing story from Tina.
My dad told me something really creepy today. Last night, I stayed over at my girlfriend's house. My dad knew I was staying there, but asked me if I had stopped by the house early in the morning. I told him that I had been there around 12:30 p.m. to change and get ready for work, but that I hadn't been home earlier than that. He then told me that my brother's girlfriend swore that she saw me much earlier than that, wearing pajamas. I would really like to know who or what she saw. I wish my mom were still living because she could tell you so much more about this weirdness. People were constantly calling her and saying that they saw me in the house, to which she had to truthfully tell them I wasn't home. I have never experienced this situation with anyone else, nor have I heard of seeing people you know who aren't actually there. I have seen ghosts and the such, but never anything like this. We know what she's talking about, don't we, Jennifer?
We do.
Let's touch on that at the end of her story. When I was 16, my parents divorced. They were always fighting, and it was a very emotional time in the household. Well, we moved out of my house because my dad didn't pay the mortgage. My mom went back to Ohio, and me, I signed up for the Army and left for basic at 17. I had already graduated from high school at 16. Fast forward to my going on leave for 30 days. I was done with basic, AIT, the school for your military job, and jump school. I was going to the 82nd, and I was going to spend 2 weeks with my dad and 2 weeks with my mom. I go to Virginia, where my dad was with his new wife. We were hanging out and stuff when I see some of my old friends from high school. They come running over to me, and they are flipping out and excited to see me. I figured it was because I had been gone for an entire year of training and had sort of split for the military without telling anyone except my mom. I had kind of been upset that I had to give up going to college early in order to go into the military, as I was kind of forced into it by my parents' divorce. Well, my friends informed me, no, that's not it. They understand that situation. No, they had thought that I was dead. They had been seeing me in my bedroom window of my old house that got foreclosed on, and when a new family moved in, they kept seeing me in the window. They had gone to speak to the teenage boy that now lived there, and he swore it was haunted. He had seen me too. They told me all this weird stuff that had happened in my old house, and about the ghost that looked like me. WTF is that? And no, I didn't go back to my old house to check it out. Wow, this sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Some of her details have Vartiga-type qualities to them, but in the end, they lean more towards doppelganger phenomena.
Right.
And although we've read a lot about that subject, it's a real treat to talk to someone directly related to experiencing it.
Agreed. Would love to hear more about that. So, Tina, thank you for sending us your story. That was fascinating. And to be sure, we'll be discussing more about doppelgangers and Vartigas in a future episode. Now, let's move on to a tale from Nigel in our very own home state of Washington.
My tale of that which goes bump in the night is a bit different than those I've heard before. I grew up in a city so close to Gig Harbor, Washington, you wouldn't even know it was there. It's called Wana, and living up to its name, Those who go there generally want to leave as soon as possible, although not everyone wants to leave. My dad was many things. A father of 12, a bearded, 6 foot, 3.5 inch tall, long-haired biker, the head detail engineer of a Tacoma concrete construction company for 35 years, an avid smoker of GPC non-filtered cigarettes, a proud Norwegian, and a very stubborn man. He absolutely refused to adapt to modern technologies at his job. As an engineer, he was still a pen and ink draftsman in a world that was rapidly becoming computerized. This would be a career-ending move for most. Not my dad. In the late 90s, the planning for Seattle's new retractable roof sports stadium was in a complete quagmire. It was such an impossible mess that no one, and I mean this globally, wanted to take the project on due to it being over budget, structurally unsound, and a host of other problems. The company that my father worked for took the contract, and he suddenly found the project on his desk. His project manager later described how my dad had, quote, taken a literal flatbed of blueprints, a calculator that was gathering dust, and a slide rule into his office where he sequestered himself, coming out only for coffee and cigarettes. 1 month later, he emerged with a single roll of vellum and a miracle. It was like Moses on a motorcycle. A sight to see. When the Draftsman Guild figured out that my dad was literally the last one of them doing everything 100% by hand, he was dubbed, quote, last of the dinosaurs. A work friend then took one of my dad's favorite jokes, old Norwegians never die, they just smell that way, and put it on a coffee mug, customizing it to read, old dinosaurs never die, they just smell that way. My dad was a big fan of lightheartedly mocking himself, so he wore the name like a badge of honor. His stubbornness didn't end there, however. When he was diagnosed with small cell esophageal cancer, that was when he stubbornly decided it was a good time to take a cross-country trip. When he returned, hooked up to an oxygen tank, he would stubbornly light up a cigarette while I would visit. Stubbornly, and asking me the same question that he had asked since I was a child. What did you learn? This was his question after every mistake and every painful event. Even when he found me sitting on the side of the road after I had the fun of my motorcycle bouncing off the bumper of a logging truck along Old 302, my bike was much more damaged than I. What did he ask? What did you learn? And if you didn't have a satisfactory answer, his response was, quote, a day you have not learned something is a day you have wasted. It all went back to his old Norwegian heritage. And this is how he pushed my siblings and me to always improve, to always look behind the surface and face the mysteries of the world with excited wonder. It was with this wonder that I returned to Wana years later, having stayed away after my dad passed away from the cancer that took him. What drew me back? A strange tale had reached my ears. After my father passed away at his home, the house was sold. The new owners were friends of my now ex-wife's sister. This is how I first heard of the strange happening. The smell of smoke in a non-smoker's home. The sound of someone moving in the garage. The rev of a motorcycle early in the morning. Of course, I brushed this off at first as the drunken ramblings of my ex-in-laws. Who doesn't? That is, until the home was sold again, and I heard down the grapevine of a bearded man being seen in the home.
Wow.
Well, I go back there to my childhood home and speak to the people who live there. A nice family, and I won't give details out in respect for their privacy. It was not long into my tour of the house and telling them how it used to look when I was suddenly interrupted by a sharp creak of wood. I immediately recognized it as the sound of the wood and wicker chair my father would sit in at his reloading bench. A chair that was no longer in the house. Keeping cool, I asked the couple what they did to the crafting room. The same crafting room my father and stepmother had shared as a converted bedroom for over a decade. The room he had passed away in. The new owner told me, yeah, I don't know. No one likes hanging out in there. My wife swears she saw an old man stroking his beard over there for some reason. And he pointed at the exact spot my father would sit to play solitaire, chess, or some other strategy game for hours on end.
Wow.
I just chuckled and smiled. That's where his computer was, I whispered. The owner asked me to repeat myself, but at that moment the smell hit me. That smell you can never forget. GPC non-filtered cigarettes, riding leather, and the light tang of salt from 35 years of working down at the Tacoma Tide Flats. It was my dad. There was no doubt in my mind. I guess I was looking like I was analyzing something because the owner broke my concentration by asking, "So what did you learn?"
I love it.
So heartwarming. Nigel's final thoughts. I'm not going to claim I saw him or some cheesy Hollywood cliche like that, but it was very clear that he was there, probably too stubborn to pass on, maybe concerned for his 12 kids. Who's to say what his motives are? But 2 families, myself, and even a neighbor who had lived there since I was a child had all experienced the same familiar feeling. What have I learned? That the world is a far stranger place than I ever dreamed. I do believe that if anything, my father would be a positive spirit, a guiding light like he was for me.
Oh, Nigel, what a wonderful story.
The world is a far stranger place than people think. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this story.
Yeah.
So heartwarming.
Yeah, and a point of view that you don't often hear in ghost stories. Like, I recognize this ghost. Hey, Dad.
So great. Fantastic.
Well, that wraps up our Parlour Stories edition of Odd Tonic. We sincerely hope you've enjoyed listening to these tales as much as we've enjoyed retelling them.
Remember to subscribe so you never miss a show, and leave us an iTunes review so your weird doppelganger in Virginia can find us too. We'll be back next week with more weird history, strange science, and topped with a maraschino cherry of paranormal goodness.
This is, dear guest, goodbye for now. But remember, if you ever explore an old abandoned homestead built on stolen Aboriginal land, and you are compelled to dig into its earthen floor until your spade strikes something unyielding, foreign, and mysterious, don't worry.
It's just us.
Good night.